Hello, everybody. It is Sunday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, Assistant Sports Editor for Multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Steelers Mock Draft Tracker video by Brian Batko, our Steelers insider. This is the video where we recap the week in mock drafts from around the internet. Some interesting picks this week, Brian. I'm excited to get into Ashton Jeanty. Luther Burden took a step up in terms of profile this week. A couple other names, Kyle Williams, Jalen Milroe, Jaxson Dart, who we talked a little bit last week with Christopher Carter, Shavon Revel. So we're going to get into all of those guys. Before we do, just want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. Whether you're in for a Steelers Pirates or Pitt game, Mike's Beer Bar is right across the street from PNC Park and has the best selection of beer in town, as well as amazing food options. They have over 20 TVs, and you can catch all of your NFL, college football, Pirates, Penguins, Riverhounds, and Premier League action right at Mike's. Come on in and try one of their 500 different available beers, 300 of them being local beers, as well as their 80 different local craft beers on tap. You can also get a flight and try out every option you can dream of. Try their steak on a stone for an awesome meal, where you choose how you want your steak cooked with heated stone right in front of you as you enjoy a night out in Pittsburgh. It's Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. Brian, Daniel Jeremiah, I think, got a lot of people fired up this week by mocking Ashton Jeanty, the Boise State running back, the Heisman Trophy runner-up to the Steelers at number 21 overall. This is one of those situations where I think he's awesome. I think you probably think he's awesome. Steelers fans think he's awesome, but the running back position is not that simple in the NFL these days. The Steelers used a first-round pick on Najee Harris, famously 4 years ago. He's been productive, but he has not been a game breaker by any means, which is sort of what you're looking for when you use a first-round pick. Let me couch the conversation to start like this. If the Steelers were to use their 21st pick on Ashton Jeanty, are they ready for him? Is he going to look more like the Saquon Barkley on the New York Giants or Saquon Barkley on the Philadelphia Eagles? Because that's kind of my read is I don't know that the Steelers are ready for a player of this caliber to be kind of a finishing piece the way Barkley was for the Eagles.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jeanty's probably the best running back prospect to come out since Saquon, and remember him going number 2 overall. I remember thinking at the time, before I was even on the Steelers beat, so I wasn't as plugged into what's going on in the NFL, but I remember thinking even at the time, Browns should just take him number 1 overall, and then they'll still get one of the quarterbacks from that class, and they can get that guy at 4th overall, and that's an interesting what if. But yeah, Jeanty that's kind of the calculus, I guess, for any team deciding on him in the first round, whether it's the Steelers or the Cowboys or the Broncos or some of the other teams he gets linked to a lot by the draft analysts is, are you getting the next Saquon potentially, or are you making a mistake by overvaluing a guy in the first round, especially someone like him who's not the biggest guy? Obviously, the competition that he played at Boise State, it's going to be a huge step up. Not that he didn't produce against the likes of Oregon and some of the other Power 5 teams that were on their schedule. But, yeah, I mean, there's still some projection there to the NFL, and there's going to be a lot of wear and tear on him after the historic season that he had last year. I don't think it's a bad idea to take him in the first round. I just don't really think the Steelers can be the team that does it because of some of that maybe natural scarring that you referenced there from the Najee pick. And not that you should let past mistakes or even just I don't even know that drafting Najee was a mistake, but just past moves that didn't pan out prevent you from making similar moves in the future. I think that could be not always sound logic, but
I think the thing with Najee, Brian, is it's not that he was not productive and didn't work out to some degree. It's that when you're using that premium pick, you have so many other needs on your team. In hindsight, it looks like you could have gotten a productive running back later than the first round. I think that's it goes back to like the Terrell Edmonds pick. I think I would slot Najee Harris in like that of like if you'd gotten Najee Harris in the 3rd round, like you got Le'Veon Bell, you love Najee Harris. But because he came in as a first rounder, the expectations are just different, and he didn't live up to those expectations, even if he was a good football player.
Yeah, I think he was a much better pick at the time than Edmonds was. I think everybody thought Edmonds was a reach, even the night that pick was made. I didn't think Najee was a reach. I think it was kind of a simple 1-for-1 swap for the Steelers that year. They said, all right, James Conner is gone. We think this guy is going to be a massive upgrade over Conner. He wasn't really that fine player, but not the type of game-changing running back that you really should be trying to get if you take one in the first round. I think, jury's out maybe on Bijan Robinson a little in Atlanta, but Jahmyr Gibbs has been that for the Lions. And I remember really ripping that pick the year they made it, but they saw something in Gibbs that a lot of draft gurus and obviously other teams didn't necessarily see, and he's been huge for Detroit. So if Jeanty can be a player like that, then his value should be high regardless of positional kind of biases there. But for the Steelers, it does just feel like they went that route a few years ago. It was not, like you said, the finishing piece. And, I think at that time there was still some hope that Ben Roethlisberger could be a Super Bowl contending quarterback, at least internally. And, Najee can help that offense get over the hump, but also be the next guy to build around once you're no longer a super quarterback-centric team. And I just don't think he had enough of the tools in his toolbox to be that. Maybe Jeanty's got the hammer, the wrench, the saw, the level, all of it. But I tend to think that, one, the Steelers have been burned by that too recently, and two, they just have too many other needs at this point on the roster.
I did want to ask about the forward-looking, view of this, because obviously the Steelers have so many other needs that you can easily justify picking another position rather than running back in the first round. But sometimes they're not just looking at the year ahead, and they're looking at overall value. And Daniel Jeremiah, I know he's kind of a true north for both of us in terms of these draft.
Yeah, I love Daniel Jeremiah. I think he's maybe the best one doing it right now. I think he's the least prone to crazy ideas that rile people up, and he's a former scout in the NFL himself, so he's got a ton of contacts, and I think he's really good. So I hesitate to say like, oh, he's blowing smoke here with Jeanty to the Steelers, but I still just don't really see it.
Right, but I think just generally speaking, he has Ashton Jeanty as his number 3 overall player in this draft. So in theory, if you're getting that guy at 21 and you feel that he's the 3rd best player in the draft, or even the 5th or the 6th or the 7th best player in the draft, do you say this is an enormous value? We're going to take this guy now, and we're going to figure out how we're going to use him over the next 4 or 5 years, and how we can build around him. Get him now and build around him later. And to some extent, they've already built in front of him with this offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I understand from like that best player available perspective, and also, you are about to have a gaping hole on your depth chart at running back, assuming Najee Harris isn't back. I don't, certainly not comparing the two, but just body type, stylistically, Ashton Jeanty and Jalen Warren are kind of similar. So if I'm the Steelers, I'm thinking, maybe we get another bigger back in here to replace Najee. You're right, Adam. They do clearly still want to be a team that builds through the trenches and, has a run-first identity. Art Rooney II's been preaching that for years upon years, especially in the post-Ben era that has picked up. So I can see the, broad strokes of a pro-Jeanty argument for the Steelers, but I just think you've got some other areas that you need to address, and you can still get a good running back because this class is tremendous, in my opinion. Granted, I wasn't looking at running backs as much the last couple years, but I think even if I had been, there wouldn't be as many that stand out as there are in 2025. So I just don't know how realistic it is that Jeanty's going to be that much of a difference maker at running back, that you're going to eschew kind of all the tried and true philosophies that have risen to the forefront of NFL thinking with that position, because you just do it. I mean, it just is, it's the nature of the position that you need a lot of other parts in place to really allow that guy to thrive. Like you said, we knew Saquon was special with the Giants, but didn't really impact winning there. So they moved on, and he goes to Philly and impacts winning in a major way. But clearly the structure around him was hugely beneficial as well, beyond his own individual talents.
Brian, are there even any other running backs you're entertaining as first rounders? I've seen, a nagging number of Quinshon Judkins picks for the Steelers. We know Travion Henderson, his teammate at Ohio State's one of those guys in the mix. Personally, there's no one else I'd even consider this conversation for in the first round in a serious way. We can talk them through with Quinshon Judkins. I love him, but Jeanty's the only one that gets my attention to the degree that I would talk about it in any serious way.
The other guys that I see usually up there are Caleb Johnson from Iowa, because he had a huge season. I mean, he broke out in a major way for the Hawkeyes, and he's I think 6 foot or 6'1", so he's got the prototypical size and he can run. And then the other guy is Omarion Hampton, who was really good coming into this past season. He was more established in the draft conversation, I think, than Caleb Johnson was, and he didn't disappoint either. So, and he's another bigger body back. So, we named those other 3 guys. Travion Henderson, I don't think he's getting first round buzz necessarily, but he had an awesome run in the CFP for the Buckeyes, and he's got that kind of game breaking speed that you want from your number one running back. So there are other names for sure. Ollie Gordon II from Oklahoma State maybe came into this year as like the number one back and was a little bit disappointing, but he's still going to be in that mix. So there are no shortage of them. I almost think the Steelers will approach that position kind of the way they did receiver in last year's draft, where they said, we think it's really good, we think it's really deep, we're just going to kind of let the draft board play out. We're not going to reach or jump up the one in the first round. And I'm not saying that was right, but I think that's just how they did it. When you look back at taking Troy Fautanu and then Zach Frazier in the first 2 rounds, and they're like, okay, we'll see who falls to us in the third. It ends up being Roman Wilson. We might never know if they were happy that was the guy who fell there, or if they were a little ticked off that position got depleted as quickly as it did. But I think you can take a similar outlook this year to running back for the Steelers.
Brian, let's transition to receiver. This week we saw a ton of Luther Burden III of Missouri in the conversation. For the first time, I really saw more picks for him than I did for Emeka Egbuka of Ohio State, Matthew Golden of Texas. Those 2 I just mentioned had kind of been the default, I think, for a lot of mock drafters for the Steelers, just looking at their needs offensively. But Luther Burden takes a big step up this week. Why do you think that maybe he's getting a little bit higher profile, especially with regard to the Steelers? Is because maybe that shine of the college football playoff is wearing off a little bit for Golden and Egbuka?
Well, I was going to say, actually, maybe part of it is just that Burden is falling down the boards for a lot of these mock drafters, because he came into the season kind of right with or right behind Tet McMillan from Arizona as the number 2 receiver in this upcoming draft class. And everybody knew he was going to declare after his junior year. He was so productive as a sophomore at Missouri that it was just a matter of time. He'd play one more season, then he'd go pro. So, he wasn't as prolific this past season. I don't know if it was more defensive attention on him or they used him differently. But I think maybe he's starting to come down a little bit from that. Like, okay, he's a no doubt top 20 pick in 2025 too. All right, maybe he's not even the second best receiver in the class. Maybe he's not even the third or fourth best receiver in the class, depending on your mileage on Travis Hunter and where he ends up positionally in the NFL. But I think Luther Burden is one of the more fascinating players in this class. And I've been studying him as much as anybody, because with our draft big board project we're working on again, I've got the receivers again this season. So trying to kind of rank and stack those guys and suss out how they fit with the Steelers. And obviously every player at every draft class has their own unique story and has a great journey to get here. But Burden is just so intriguing. He was a 5-star recruit from East St. Louis High School, which is one of those weird things. It's technically in Illinois, but it's closer to St. Louis. So it's he's a hometown guy who could have gone anywhere. He picked Missouri to try to like uplift the program. They love him there. He's a legend in Como, as they call it. And he's probably got the most fun highlight reel to view of any receiver in this class. Maybe McMillan, but if it's not McMillan, they're 2 vastly different players. McMillan 6'5", 212. That's probably why he's not going to be anywhere near the Steelers range, but Burden, a sub 6 foot guy, he's just like impossible to tackle. I mean, Pro Football Focus had him with 30 forced missed tackles this past season, number 1 in the country, even though he only had 600 receiving yards and change. So, I mean, people just fall off of him. It seems like it takes all 11 to gang tackle him at times. And I hate to even like invoke these comparisons because it seems like we do it every year with one of the under 6 foot receivers coming out. I think we did it with Zay Flowers, maybe Jordan Addison to an extent, maybe Wan'Dale Robinson a few years ago. But Luther Burden does do some AB-ish things, the way he moves and the way he tracks balls over it, because he's mainly a slot guy at that size. But when they do line him up on the outside, like he can beat a guy off the line and he can haul a pass in over his shoulder and win against single coverage. So all of that said, all the incredible talent and athleticism that's wrapped up in that, 5'11", 205-pound body, he's got some of the wide receiver edginess to him. He got penalized for throwing a punch at an Arkansas guy. He got penalized for throwing the ball at a Boston College player on the sideline. He's going to probably have to have some sit downs with teams at the combine, maybe on these 30 visits, and explain, like, yes, I can keep the emotions in check. I'm not going to be this mercurial my whole career, and I'm going to be worth a first-round pick.
I think the AB setup leads into my next question, Brian, which is, my perception of Luther Burden is that, yes, he can make those big plays that we remember AB for. But AB also worked a part of the field that the Steelers just don't seem to have an answer for right now. Lance Zierlein, the NFL.com scout, who I think you and I both look to a lot, he compared Luther Burden to Garrett Wilson, which I think is going to get a lot of people's attention. But one of the knocks he had on him was that most of his catches, 75% of his catches, were inside of 10 yards. I looked at that and said, the Steelers do not have anyone who is working that part of the field effectively. And that would be a phenomenal fit with what they need. I don't know that they need another guy necessarily who, is fast and you're throwing the deep balls to. I think Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson, George Pickens should be those things for your offense. It's that technical, I don't want to say possession receiver, but someone who has the capability to work, in the short and intermediate passing game better than what they have now.
Yeah, I mean, I think Burden can pretty much do it all. I mean, that's why he was a 5-star recruit. That's why everybody had him coming out of the draft after 3 years, and why he had, I think, 1,200 receiving yards maybe as a sophomore at Missouri. And this is with Brady Cook throwing him the ball, not one of these, surefire day 1 or day 2 picks under center. So, yeah, I think he can do that. And, kind of my natural inclination to look at Steelers receiver targets in this draft is, whether George Pickens is here or not in 2025, and, it doesn't seem particularly likely that he'll be here for the long term, you probably want to get another bigger body in here. That's why I mocked Emeka Egbuka to them in my initial mock draft for this year. I think you want to get someone else with some size to complement the people who might be here a little longer, Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin III, especially. But Burden is very intriguing, like I said, because you don't want to just cast him aside because of the measurables. It seems like he's got the potential to be in that mold of, like, remember 2 or 3 years ago, it was so trendy that every team was looking for the next Tyreek Hill. I think there was like 4 or 5 under 6 foot receivers who went in the first couple rounds, like Rondale Moore and Elijah Moore went really high. Tutu Atwell went pretty high to the Rams. So, like, everybody had that idea of, okay, we need someone who can take the screens, take the jet sweeps, run a go, take the top off of a defense. So, I mean, I think teams have moved a little back in the other direction of, like, let's get these taller, outside contested catch winners. But Burden, yeah, I mean, he's going to make teams think pretty hard. And I think there's certainly certain teams who need that type of receiver even more than the Steelers. So he might not be around at 21, but if he's there, it'd be curious to see if they would go that route. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he is one of the guys they have in for one of those 30 visits, because, like I said, I think there are some I don't know if I want to say red flags, but there's some stuff on tape that you probably want to ask him about. And he is known as being like a really good dude in Missouri, like community service and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think there's off the field concerns, but as far as that temperament on the field, maybe some teams wouldn't matter. But if you're the Steelers and everything that's gone on the last 3 or 4 years with the bad body language and the sideline antics, maybe it's a little more of an alarm that you're like, okay, we don't want to risk going down this road again.
Yeah, but that's also, I mean, that's a lot of people watching probably would think that's a terrible look on the coaching staff if you can't take the player that's best available for you because you can't figure out how to manage these personalities. And I would tend to agree of like, bring the player in, and then if the coaching staff can't handle them, then we should be talking about the coaching staff.
Well, I think it's more so about just like, can one of these years, can we just have a Steelers receiving core that doesn't have some sort of drama, especially from their best player? I mean, it does seem like they have almost sought out these guys as a market inefficiency, whether it's George Pickens, who had way more, I think, like rumblings about him coming out of Georgia than a Luther Burden did. And, Chase Claypool was known as, being a tough competitor and like high football character and all that. And I think he just kind of drank his own Kool-Aid too soon in Pittsburgh after that big rookie year. But, AB, the revisionist history on him is like, he didn't just fall to the 6th round because of size or Central Michigan competition. Like there was some real stuff in the background that teams were wary of, and why he ended up at that level of school anyway, based on how good he was. So Martavis Bryant, another one, like they took the flyer on him and it worked out until it didn't. So it's just, we all know this pattern and this trend of Steelers receivers who have gone from Deontay Johnson. I mean, he wasn't a headache initially, but he certainly was by the end. So I just, if somebody told you like, hey, Emeka Egbuka, he's already been kind of the second fiddle at Ohio State and he's never done anything remotely close to complaining, like, and he's a solid player, just kind of bet on like the person not rocking the boat. I wouldn't necessarily poke holes in that either.
Yeah, Egbuka's a winner, and I think that's part of, I think at a more visceral level, that's what we're talking about. Some of these guys are just, I mean, they can be productive, they can be good players, but are they winners? I think that's something that the Steelers liked about Roman Wilson. Obviously, it's not a first-round pick, but, I remember those conversations when he was picked as well. So maybe that's something they value in Egbuka over Burden in the end. I'm curious to see how that plays out. Brian, got a few other players we want to get to this week. One receiver was in an A to Z sports mock. It was Kyle Williams of Wazoo. His profile to me looked pretty similar to what they have in Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson, who I just mentioned. Not a particularly great route runner, not a ton of size. To me, that's kind of meh.
Yeah, very, very meh. I don't think that'll be even the type of receiver that the Steelers would be looking to if they wait till the 3rd round. There are some bigger bodied guys out there like a Ja'Cory Brooks or Jack Bett or it's Nick Nash from San Jose State, who was the leading receiver in FBS last year. So I'd look more to one of those guys. The only thing I really have seen about Kyle Williams to this point in the pre-draft process was I think he was the guy at the Senior Bowl who went viral for like just some ridiculous 10-step release off the line of scrimmage that, ball knowers were kind of making fun of him for. So I don't want to boil Kyle Williams down to one clip that people were ripping on, but that's the fact that that's the only thing that really stands out to me about him. That's not a great sign. He's not really on my radar at all.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll find a job somewhere, but it seems like a duplication of roles with what the Steelers already have. The 1st-round pick in that mock, and you and I were texting back and forth about this one, but the pickings are slim here, Brian, for the mock draft tracker in the week before the combine. All the mock drafters are getting ready for that, getting ready to release all those mocks. So there's not a ton out there this week, but this A to Z Sports mock had Shavon Revel Jr. of East Carolina, cornerback. He's big. He certainly fits the Steelers prototype in that mold, but he had an ACL injury in 2024, has only played one full season with the Pirates. And then he's also a small college guy. And I wanted to dig into the actual data of, how the Steelers, look at those guys in the first 3 rounds. And Ben Roethlisberger was the last one they picked out of a group of 5 school. That was 20 years ago, 2004. You can add in, I think, only 4 more guys in the first 3 rounds in that same time span. I think Emmanuel Sanders and I forget who they picked from Oregon State. 2 other picks that were like borderline realignment. Should they be group of 5? Should they be power 5? But they kind of canceled each other out because Oregon State went down and SMU went up. So it's only been 5 guys since 2004. I think that's a lot of history for Shavon Revel to go up against, considering that's not his only downside.
Yeah, I would definitely worry about any corner coming off of a torn ACL. I know it's more routine to recover from these days. George Pickens had one at Georgia, and he's as physically gifted as he's ever been. So I mean, the Steelers weren't scared off at all by that. And I guess you could, if you're one of these more like cynical Steelers fans, if that's the right word for it, be like, hey, who cares if our first round pick doesn't play in 2025 or isn't himself in 2025? Like we got to start thinking about rebuilding and tearing this thing up. And he's more for the future and he'll have a 5th-year option. But I just, I can't really bring myself to think that way, at least not yet, about this team. And I just don't know that Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame, the other corner who's got injury concern, and Will Johnson from Michigan did too, but I don't think his was quite as significant as Morrison, who had hip surgery, and Revel, who obviously had the ACL surgery. I just wonder if those two, Morrison and Revel, fall out of the first round completely, because I think teams can kind of stomach the injury concerns a lot more once you get into that second round than spending that premium first round pick on somebody who you haven't seen them in game action since that major setback. So, it stinks for Revel that he was a really good prospect playing good football before he went down. And yeah, I think you make a good point too, Adam, that the Steelers have had opportunities in these last several years to maybe consider a smaller school player with that first round pick, but they haven't pulled the trigger on that. And it does seem to be kind of a thread from the Kevin Colbert to Mike Tomlin to Omar Khan era here, that they have a lot more trust in the players who come, especially from the big winning programs, but even, to a lesser extent, like just, yes, Power 5, stacking them up against that competition.
Yeah, like they love Wisconsin, for example. We've seen a lot of guys from Wisconsin
Ohio
in recent
State,
years.
Alabama,
Yeah,
Georgia.
Yeah, well, those are the winning teams. I was trying to mention there's some schools that you can tell that they like even beyond whether they're winning or not. Like Wisconsin has not been that program in the last handful.
Even Michigan before they were like today's Michigan, or I guess last year's Michigan. But yeah, they always seem to gravitate to those schools too. And this isn't really like anything to do with Revel, but just kind of because we're kind of on the topic of like Steelers drafting trends. I do think the organization values players who have been in the same kind of conditions and weather as you're going to be in the AFC North. And that makes some sense. If a guy is from California and he played at USC and he's only ever really been in nice sunny weather, you do have to do a little bit of wondering, like, okay, how's he going to play when it's 5 degrees outside at Acrisure Stadium and it's a blizzard and we're trying to beat the Ravens to move on to the AFC Championship, like if you're ever in that scenario again. So I do think that's another reason why they probably go to the Wisconsins and Michigans and Ohio States of the world, at least if it's a tiebreaker between 2 good players.
Hey, USC is a Big Ten team now, Brian.
That's true. That's true. I guess they do have some frigid games in Ann Arbor and State College coming up on the schedule.
Last thing I wanted to say on Revel was, we did see a similar phenomenon with Corey Trice, where I think he was valued as a late day 2 pick, ends up falling to them in the 7th round. So, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a similar phenomenon with Revel, because I think other teams have similar concerns. Granted, I don't think you're talking from going from the 3rd to the 7th. Maybe you're talking from being a first round pick down to a 3rd. Yeah. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that kind of situation. Maybe the Steelers get a chance to look at him later in the draft.
I just don't think the Steelers are gonna. I think they like Corey Trice enough still that I don't know that they're going to prioritize a corner in the first 2 or 3 rounds. I mean, I think though they certainly need to get one at some point to come in here and compete, and that looks like another position where they might address it via free agency too, bringing a veteran like they have the last few years, the likes of Levi Wallace, Patrick Peterson, Dante Jackson. Of course, that was a trade, but so that would be another factor that I think will mitigate the likelihood that they would sink another day 1 or day 2 pick in corners. So I don't know that we need to spend too much time comparing Revel to Jahdae Barron and some of the other guys that'll be going in that general range.
Yeah, I think a lot of mock drafters fall when you have one good corner, they fall in love with one good young corner, they fall in love with the idea of you having 2 and being able to like rely on those guys for 10 years. So I think that's just something of a mock drafter or habit.
It's pre-free agency mock drafts. So, I mean, these are all going to change once we see what all 32 teams do in free agency and what positions are no longer as big of a need for them on paper.
Wanted to get your thoughts on a couple quarterbacks quickly here, Brian. Jalen Milroe still popping around, the mid rounds here in the multi-round mocks. You see, since I wrote, because we do the written mock draft tracker on postgazette.com, I wrote that yesterday. Since then, there's been 2 CBS Sports mocks and a couple others that I was able to track this morning that had Jaxson dart again to the Steelers in the first round. I think Field Yates of ESPN was the first to kind of make that suggestion, but there seems to be a little bit of momentum there. I wanted to get your thoughts on those guys. I had Chris Carter on last week. He was not super impressed with either one, but I figured I'd get your take considering they are not going away.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're 2 of the more divisive quarterback prospects in this class, which might be surprising considering this is a class with Shadur Sanders in it. But, even these 2, maybe even more so Dart, because I think Dart has a certain faction of people, and I guess Field Yates is now included in this because of his projection there, that think Dart is very clearly the 3rd best QB in this class and has franchise QB potential. And I can kind of see that. I think there's a world where he is, not just a product of the Lane Kiffin scheme, and he's actually got the arm talent that if everything breaks right, maybe he is, one of these elite quarterbacks in the NFL who can help have you in that conversation year in and year out in the AFC. Maybe it's not particularly likely, but he's got his believers. I'll say that much. And I think he's also got his skeptics big time who think, Dart is nowhere near a first round pick and he's more so like a day 3 pick. So I don't know where water's going to find its level with Dart. Maybe he will be a controversial guy throughout the entire process, but I could also see him having one of those pro days that people go goo and gaga for, which probably shouldn't at this point because of how much evidence we have to the contrary that it doesn't really translate to being a good quarterback. And then Milroe, yeah, I mean, he's always going to be polarizing because of the legs and 20 rushing touchdowns last year. But then you're going to have the people who go way overboard in the other direction. Oh, this guy is just a glorified Tim Tebow in the year 2025. So I don't know. I mean, he's a pretty difficult evaluation, I think. Might have been good for him to go back to Alabama. He didn't. He's in this class. If he runs like a 4.4 or something, someone's going to, I think, fall in love with the traits there and believe that they can coach him up. But yeah, at what point do you take a risk on someone who's got so many accuracy woes on film and didn't exactly light it up in Mobile at the Senior Bowl per reports? I don't think the Steelers are going to be in a position to really take the big swing on either one of those guys. I'm still in the camp that think they'll find a way to bring back Justin Fields and make the drafting a QB before round 4 moot, but you never know until it happens. I don't blame any of the mock draft folks for predicting it.
Yeah, no, and I think, the Super Bowl, Jalen Hurts, those comparisons are inevitable. And when you're the Steelers and Andy Weidl's your guy, that kind of goes doubly. Maybe it's just a trendy thing, but I think we're still going to see a lot of Milroe through this process. Brian, we'll wrap it up on Jahdae Barron. We talked in some depth about him last week. Has the ability to move across the formation and be used as a chess piece. That's the favorable take, but he's also been divisive because when I see that, I think, well, why wasn't he playing on the outside the whole time? What's your read on him as a prospect, who maybe has a bit more depth to him than some of these other cornerbacks we were talking about earlier in the show?
I think he's a good prospect, and I think I tend to think the versatility thing is more of a pro than a con for Barron, especially with how well he played last season. And I think even as a corner, he was sort of the heart and soul of that Texas defense, big time leader for them. And yeah, I think he could play inside or outside. At the end of it, I think he'd probably even play safety if the team wanted or needed him to do that. So if the Steelers get into a situation where, okay, let's say they get a receiver in the first round and Barron's on the board there in the second round, and they just are in love with all the intangibles and all the production that he had in college, and say, okay, well, we'll just take our chances on this deep defensive line class, and we'll hope to get one in round 3 because we can't pass up on this guy. I guess I wouldn't hate it. I think it's more so clear that no matter what they do in free agency, they're still going to have to get some talent in the pipeline here at wide receiver and D-line before anything else. But you never know. There's also running back in the mix. There is, you can just as much make the case they need to get some younger talent in the pipeline at cornerback, given the way Corey Trice finished out the season. So I think in a vacuum, Barron is a Steelers type of player for sure, but just don't know if their needs and priorities are going to line up with his draft value, because when you're a jack of all trades like he is, probably just about every team can talk themselves into looking at you as someone to add early on.
Yeah, this is one of those situations, Brian, where I remember the draft 2 years ago, and they had that extra second rounder at the top of the second round. With the needs that they have, this just feels like a year that they'd love to do that if they could, but they don't have that pick. So, well, who knows? Maybe there will be some trades between here and there. I don't know if they're going to get to number 33 overall, but just something to keep an eye on. Brian, thanks for joining me this week. I look forward to breaking down the draft with you again in a couple of weeks. Everyone else, please stay tuned to the channel. Christopher Carter will be back with the North Shore Drive Monday, Wednesday, and Friday this week. We have Paul Zeiss's weekly or daily live shows. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Pop a like on this video. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.